Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, and I hope everyone had a great Labor Day weekend. My name is Ashley Sullivan, and I'll be your host for today's webinar on hot regulatory issues in IT. Before I introduce today's presenter, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. Today's presentation will last about 45 minutes, and the slides can be downloaded at www.wolfandco.com/webinars/2012. If you have any questions at any point throughout the presentation, please send them in to me by using the questions box on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer your questions at the end of the presentation. You have two options for audio today. You may dial in by phone or listen through your computer. Our audience will be muted during the session, so if you need to communicate with me during the webinar, please use the chat box also located on the webinar's control panel. I'd now like to give a brief background of the firm. Wolf & Company was established in 1911, and we are very excited to have just celebrated our 100th anniversary. Building on our tradition of unparalleled guidance, we provide our clients with assurance, tax, business consulting, and risk management services. We have over 180 professionals working for the firm and have offices in Boston and Springfield, Massachusetts, and Albany, New York. We currently employ over 45 risk management professionals in the areas of IT assurance, internal audit, regulatory compliance, and Wolfpack integrated risk management, and provide services to nearly 250 financial institutions in 19 different states and 1 U.S. territory. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Will Nowick. Will is a senior manager in Wolf's IT Assurance and Security Services Group. Thanks so much for presenting today, Will. I'll now hand the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I just want to let you know today's agenda. It's going to be a little similar to last year's presentation. We're covering some of the same topics. There's going to be some spin on some of them. I'll give you some more information on certain areas where I've seen a lot of clients either ask me questions throughout the year, or things where I've seen where the examiners have kind of poke holes in certain areas. Today's agenda will cover the IT audit process, focusing on where we can really help benefit. I should say where the regulators are focused on process itself. A lot of times when we run into some of those challenges that we see a lot of you folks facing, we'll take a look at GLIBA. GLIBA is always a hot item, as you know, and it seems to never go away. Take a look at electronic banking and cover some aspects of the fill. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but we will talk about some of the things you can do to really reduce your risk, especially with commercial customers. We'll talk about mobile devices, system security, with patch management, monitoring, vendor management with a slide at least on cloud computing, as well as business continuity. So we got a lot to cover today. So I'm going to go through it pretty quick. Please feel free to email me, call me if you have any questions on any of the material. Like I said, we're going through this pretty quick, so we can't spend as much time as probably would like to in all these areas. All right, the IT audit process. Right now what we're seeing is a lot of banks, especially the small organizations, don't have their own internal audit director. In addition to that, management, usually the IT director, is involved in scoping out the IT audit. We see that sometimes scope is limited based on budgets, where it's not really covering or all of the risks that we should be covering. So those are some of the challenges we're seeing. What we have done at Wolf, and I think it's working out very well over the last few years, is really trying to help you folks communicate and identify the IT audit universe, and that's something that you should be doing if you're not using Wolf. So inventory your IT systems and your IT processes, and have them be part of your IT audit plan. What you want to do is cover all of your information systems within a 3-year plan, with high risk being annually, moderate more of a 2-year, every 2 years, or 18 months, 2 years, and then low risk being every 3 years. I know this is a large expense to cover all these systems, especially when you talk about the loads, because a lot of times the loads don't have much to it. There's various things that you can do to help facilitate that process, and using controlled self-assessments is something that at Wolf we try to have our clients do, so that we can cover all of your technologies within a 3-year period. And if anyone does not know what a controlled self-assessment is, controlled self-assessments are where the business owners or the folks in charge of the systems perform a self-assessment on basic controls that they have over that application or system. In addition, we also see folks basing the risk assessment frequency on total risk or residual risk. We like to see it should be based on inherent risk. And the reason is that you may have strong controls that mitigate that risk, but that's what you want to test. You want to ensure that those high inherent risk areas are being covered by your control environment properly. And that's where audit or when you're doing these self-assessments kind of can ensure those risks, those controls are strong where you say they are strong. BCP and GLBA need to be reviewed annually. I like to take a look at the whole GLBA program annually, and then what you also want to do, and we'll talk more about that a little bit, is test your key GLBA controls. In addition, you want to make sure you cover your business continuity plan as well. Now, your business continuity plan is usually very complex. It usually may take a lot of hours to look at the whole thing. Based on conversations I've had with examiners, they don't expect you to cover the full BCP program annually, but they want to make sure that you are covering significant portions of it every year. And you may change, just like you change general controls every year, you can change and augment your scope in those areas to kind of cover your BCP plan. You want to, when the auditors are putting together the plan for you or managers putting together the plan, what you want to do is make sure that you do cover prior year IT audit areas, any examiner findings in the last year, and any industry issues. For example, an industry issue this year would be the kind of, or I should say within the last 12 months, would have been the electronic banking, the new field that came out in June 2011. You'd want to make sure that you were focusing your audit attention on those areas. Again, scope should not be dictated by management. I know this sometimes has gotten us into, I should say, some difficult situations with our clients, as if we believe a certain scope needs to be covered, that's the scope we want to present to the audit committee, regardless of your budget. And I know that's sometimes difficult. We do that only not for the reason to feel that, to get extra money. That's not the reason why we do it on our side. We're not trying to grow the business that way. But what it does do is it gives the decision to the audit committee to either overrule the budget or say, no, we're going to stick with the budget, we'll reduce the scope, or whoever your auditors are, reduce the scope, which is okay. At that point, then the audit committee is doing their job, and they're the ones dictating scope. Again, not management. So that's how. So if you ever see that, or if your auditors are trying to cover more than what you think you need covered, it's probably a good idea just to let it go through the audit committee and then have the audit committee make that decision. Here's just a sample frequency chart where you'd want to cover your high inherent risk or quality of risk things annually, moderate, and low every 3 years. All right. And anyone needs any samples of this stuff, please let me know, and I'll feel free to share those multi-year plans with you. All right. GLBA is always a key area that the examiners are focusing on. We're still seeing is the financial institutions are still not compliant. They're still having some deficiencies within their GLBA program. Sometimes it's with vendor management. Sometimes it's just with the inventory of information. We're also seeing organizations not do a really good job with their key controls. And what they're not fully being identified. That really mitigates the risk of that information mistakenly being compromised. And another thing we're seeing is control decisions are not really being made without there's either a lack of understanding of the potential risk or loss, or they're just not being properly communicated to the board, whether it's whether the management's making control decisions that really affect or could affect the overall reputation of the financial institution. We're also seeing, and this is where that board reporting is kind of weak. It kind of goes hand in hand there, where we want to see some board reporting, and this is something that the examiners are focused on: communication to the board. So communicating what's really going on, what are the risks, what are the threats, and let them decide whether money or resources need to be spent in those areas. not just accepting it and then covering up and waiting for audit to find that issue. So what you need to do, you need to inventory your customer information. You want to consider all third parties. You know, I think a lot of you folks do a really good job with your text. The non-text are where I see some deficiencies, and examples are attorneys. A lot of you folks have closing attorneys, maybe 30 or 40 of them. And what some of the issues are there is that when you're doing your third-party vendor management, you're not including them as part of your monitoring activities. Each attorney needs to have its own monitoring activity associated with it. Common, or I should say, examples of some of the those monitoring activities, is A, they're already protected because there's attorney-client privilege, so you can kind of lean on that. You want to make sure you have a confidentiality agreement with them. And the third item is you might want to just, because they don't have a say 16 or any type of assurance report, give them a sample, like a small security questionnaire, and have them fill that out. Making sure that where you're keeping the information, is it locked, is it secured, who has access, is it limited. Give some real basic questions. If it's stored electronically, is it encrypted? Those type of things. And I think you'll be all set. There's not much more you can do at that point. And also make sure you inventory the paper. So we also see electronic formats are usually pretty good, but paper is sometimes lacking. The next portion of Global, you want to really do a good job inventory, identifying your key controls. And I've had a lot of clients ask me over the last several years, what are some good examples of key Global controls. So I'm just going to give you some examples right now. Again, if you don't take notes, feel free to email me, and I'll get these like a list to you of some sample key controls. But think about access controls when you're regarding customers. So any system that's holding customer data, storing customer data, what are the access controls? Unique user accounts, your password settings. Maybe you're using secure protocols like HTTPS. Those are some good examples of access controls. Lockout, user account lockout. Think about physical access as well. Who has access to the location where that information resides? Is it limited? Is it in a locked cabinet? Is it behind the teleline? Things like that. Encryption of anything, any portable device is an example. Or even when you're transferring that data, that's an example of a key CLIPA control. Any type of procedures you have designed to, a key one. An example of this one would be your core provider, your core system. If you have someone wants to change, if I want to change my address, hopefully there's a process in place to verify that it's me requesting the address change. Because once that address change is changed, that means someone could have completely taken over my identity at your location, at your financial institution. So being able to understand modifications to the system of record for your customer systems, dual control processes, background checks, any type of things like that. One of the biggest areas I see is the biggest weakness of a lot of the control design at a lot of the financial institutions is monitoring systems. What are you doing to actually detect actual attempts? I think you do a good job on the network layer. When you get down to the application and database layer, or even the OS, sometimes you don't have the monitoring controls in place necessary to identify a breach. So that's something I think you want to focus on. And we'll talk a little bit about monitoring controls later in the presentation. Response programs, instant response programs is something that you want to further develop. There's very common issues that you go through. You're constantly probably reissuing debit cards, credit cards, because they're constantly being compromised at merchants. But another thing is, phishing attacks or walking through the process of an incident that occurs at your commercial customer. Making sure that you're able to quickly identify an attack, and potentially, if you did wire money out or transfer money out, being able to quickly get that money back is really, really key. And of course, any type of measures to protect against destruction, loss, or damage of customer information. That anything like that, backups, that could be considered a key global control. Again, it's what you consider key is what needs to be tested. There should be more than just a few key global controls in your organization. There'll be a lot, and you want to make sure that you track it, test it on an ongoing basis, at least annually. Sometimes you have audit test some of those areas, as well as having your own internal people perform the control self-assessments, or having someone independent, have, deposits test lending and stuff like that, making sure that it's independent that way. Or your information security officer. Right? We see a lot of that going on now. Again, just to reduce the cost of compliance. All right, and one of the things too, when the FDIC asks for, give me a list of your GLBA technologies, not only do you want to include your technologies that have customer information, but you also want to include technologies that protect GLBA information. So that's your firewall, your IDS, antivirus, things of that nature. So just be aware of that. Next is board reporting. I know we covered this last year. I just want to touch upon it again. I think overall in the summary, most of the financial institutions I go do a pretty good job with the executive summary. They talk about the overall status of the program. They talk about compliance with it. I also see a lot of you talking about today's threats and discuss kind of like the industry challenges. I think you're doing a really good job with that. Continue to do that. On the risk assessment areas, I think, again, you're doing a pretty good job with the talking about your risks, showing the risk assessments, presenting the risk assessments to the board. I know many of you over the last couple of years have implemented places where you do have high risk and you don't have strong control, that you do actually have a control remediation plan, or it's been presented to the board where the board has now either accepted the risk pretending and you have an outstanding issue waiting either for a vendor to fulfill that requirement, or just an outstanding item that you're tracking and monitoring over a longer period of time where you don't have full control over remediation efforts. One of the things you still want to do is also make, even though you're presenting probably a subset of your risk assessment in the global board reporting, you also want to include your full risk assessment on the side, whether it's through a board portal or something. So if the board does want to access that information, they have full access to that information. The next area is the board reporting. This is where I think most of you can do a good job enhancing your requirements, and this has to do with control decisions. Being able to communicate your control decisions to the board is very key. One of the things we've recently seen some of the banks that's working out pretty well is that they form risk committees, and I know many of you have a risk committee, and that's where a lot of not only executive management or senior management show up, but we also have some line managers who are actually the ones managing the day-to-day risks in each of their respective departments, having them talk about audit findings and remediation and any self-findings or risks that they have identified, examiner findings, or any kind of industry issues or challenges that you're facing, making sure that those are being reported there, they're tracked. I think one of the things I just see is in the minutes where things are just kind of being discussed, which is good, but I think when you identify an issue that you are going to remediate, what you want to do is kind of document that in the tracking matrix, just like you track your audit findings, and track it to remediation. Don't just talk about it in the meeting. I think that's the next step a lot of you have to make, and once you make it there, you're almost in risk management nirvana, or whatever the terminology would be. All right, and again, if you present the board, find the issues to the board, let them reverse any of your decisions. It's really on them to kind of guide management into making the right decision. And if they do question you, that's okay. Let's have an open dialogue, discussion. And I know when all of you in a room, you'll come up with the right answer that solves both budget constraints as well as reduce the risk and reputational risk of the organization. As it relates to service providers, I would say that most of you are doing a good job with this. I think when it comes down to it, it's the monitoring aspect. You do a good job with making sure there's confidentiality agreements in place, but you need to be able to track this. That's what the examiners are expecting to see, is that when you give them the list of all your third parties that have access or may have access to customer information, they want to make sure that you have a spreadsheet that aligns with that says we have a confidentiality agreement in place for each one of them, and they want to be able to say where is that agreement located, because they may ask, I want these 5, and they're going to go check where that location is. So making sure that you document that is really, really key. That's where we've seen some of the examiners kind of focus their attention. Another thing from a reporting perspective you want to consider is monitoring activities for each of these vendors, the last time you performed these monitoring activities, and what were the results. Conclude on the results. It's really key to conclude on the results. Just saying that you reviewed this S70 doesn't tell anyone really anything other than the fact that, okay, you reviewed it, but really what was your conclusion? You should have monitoring activities with all the vendors you do business with. There's going to be issues where you identify where you're not satisfied with the vendor's response, and that's okay. I'm not saying you have to fire them or get rid of them, but you need to manage and work through those issues with those vendors. And it's okay to put them on like a tracking list that you present to the board. Say, hey, these are the issues we're dealing with this customer or this vendor right now. We're working through it. Here's what we've maybe implemented as a solution near term, but maybe there's a longer term solution that you just need to track, again, to remediation. You know, no one thinks you're going to be able to fix everything right away. But what you want to do is identify the things you can fix and then make sure that you have a plan going forward. The next section of the global board reporting is the results of the testing. So this is where you put the results of your key control testing. So whether it's internal audit or audit performing the test, or your you know, your information security, your independent person at each financial institution who is doing the tests, or how you break that up. Again, present the results of those tests. You know, another thing you want to put in the testing is any independent vulnerability and pen testing work that you have done, or any internal vulnerability scanning that you're doing yourself. I know when you start to approach $1 billion, I think a good thing to do is, and I strongly recommend bringing your own IT vulnerability scanner in-house. You know, get a Rapid7 Nexpose vulnerability scanner inside, scan your environment, validate that your patch management system is installing patches on a regular basis per your policy. You know, follow up with any issues there. Another thing too is social engineering. You know, present your social engineering test for the year. But I'm starting to see a lot of the banks because once a year, and we do it once a year, and it's almost like an automatic finding every time we do phishing. There's only very seldom do we not have a phishing, when we do a phishing test, a finding in the report. And based on studies, the only way to really reduce it is to do it more often. And I'm not saying hire Wolf, not to do it more often, but I'm saying do it more often yourself. Go get the tool we use is called phishme.com. Go get it. It's very easy to use. It's very easy to use. Go get it, implement it at your place, at your own financial institution. Run it more frequently, monthly. You will see a change in the culture when it comes to identifying phishing attacks. People will start to learn. They'll start to get it. Doing it once a year, they're not going to learn. You know, it's too far gone at that point. So it's repetitive, it's educational, and it's frequent tests. You're going to be very successful in this area if you bring it in-house. Again, it's something that you should consider. I think you've overall done everyone's done a pretty good job of identifying and reporting your security breaches. Most of the time, during your annual board report, it just says, I see a lot of folks just note, see every board meeting because of all the security breaches. And I'm not saying that the banks are being breached, but you're reissuing your customers are constantly being breached, whether it's at a merchant with a reissue of a debit or credit card, or it could be online banking fraud, that type of stuff. So again, continue with that. Management's responses is the next section of the global report that you should do. And again, this should be a summary of responses to any audit reports, things like that nature, breaches, follow up on your control remediation plan regarding your the GLIBA type issues, those type of findings. And of course, the last section of the report is recommendations for changes in information security program. So any type of changes that you've made doesn't have to be strictly with the policy, but it's your program. And remember, our program is policies, procedures, standards. It's your risk assessments. It's all of those things combined equals your program. So any kind of changes there, report to the board. All right, electronic banking. This one's very cool stuff going on here from a security perspective. You guys may not think it's cool, but it's keeping me busy. There's hundreds of thousands, depending on your customers, but there's either hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars at risk. You're going against highly skilled hackers that are backed by organized crime. They have the resources. They have the motive, and they have all the time in the world to attack you. It is a worst nightmare for a financial institution. It really is, and there's a high likelihood that you will be attacked. I think many of you have probably already experienced at least attempts of fraud at your organization. Hopefully, most of you have stopped it, but it's real, and they don't care if you're a small community bank or if you're a Bank of America. You will be a target, and they're targeting your customers. Some of the other, the biggest challenge we see is your commercial customers and in their security of their systems. They'll sign off saying that they have firewalls in place. They have security and they have patch management. They're not patched. They're patching Microsoft Windows only. They're not patching their Adobes, their Javas, their Apple products that are resident on their workstations. And that's how the bad guys are getting in. Another thing we see that's very common with a lot of the internet banking technologies is that the admin consoles, the ones you use at the bank, they're not requiring multi-factor. They still use either cookie-based multi-factor authentication or just something, security challenges, questions. Nothing complicated. And a lot of times, there's a lot of conversations I have where, a lot of financial institutions are compliant with the guidance, but that compliance doesn't even equal security. PCI guidance, that's right. All you hear is how a shop was hacked and they were PCI certified. But it happens too often. Compliance doesn't equal security. So what you need to do is perform a risk assessment. The risk should evaluate should evaluate the type of customer, the transactional capabilities, what type of transactions we're getting up there, the sensitivity of the customer information being communicated, the ease and use of the communication method. As you go mobile, it's a little bit more risk. Is it secure? That kind of thing. Is encrypted? That transport layer. The volume of transactions and the amount of those transactions. You also want to periodically assess, what are the changes in your own environment in the industry. For example, are you now using remote deposit capture, and are you extending out beyond your normal geographic area? That's again another layer of complexity that you now need to add to your risk assessment results. And of course, you need to address each area within the risk. And when we say this, I could break out electronic banking into 4 areas. So you got the endpoint, so that's the security of the actual device being logged in. So that would be, what I'd be concerned there would be patch management, antivirus, that type of stuff. But that's the stuff that the banks don't have control over. My financial institution does not have control over my laptop at my house. I do. And how do they protect myself from myself? Because I'm not on Facebook, but a normal person's on Facebook. They're clicking on links. They practice bad internet browsing habits. Myself, I practice good habits. I only go to business reasons websites. So securing the endpoint, how do you do that? There are technologies now available that you can implement called client hardware secure browser. So it's your Trusteers, your IronKeys, your Previx. Those type of tools can help you implement that virtual secure browser. So I could have malware resident on my laptop. And you know what? It's not going to be able to steal my credentials on my online banking system. So that's the first point. For those of you not using a Trusteer or an IronKey or a Previx, really look into it. It's probably one of the best security measures you can take. And I would strongly recommend you making it required for your commercial customers and make it optional for your retail customers. I know some of you have it already and using it, and the folks that are using it say they sleep well at night. At the session level, now you're talking about the authentication. So this is the login. The two things you need to do there is you need to implement some type of multi-factor authentication. You also need to implement some type of suspicious monitoring activity. So there are tools out there. You've got Token. RSA has solutions for both, and Guardian Analytics also has some solutions as well for monitoring suspicious activity. So kind of look at those type of activities at the session level. At the transaction level, again, implement ways that you can authenticate the transaction, separate from the session level. The more layers you can throw in, the more secure those layers will be. The more secure those transactions will be, and less losses you will take. I know there's a recent, recently Ocean Bank versus Patco, where the first court of appeals reversed the district court's ruling, saying that the district court first ruled that Patco was responsible because of the lack of security on their end, and then the first Court of Appeals reversed that at the Ocean Bank level, I should say, and said, okay, that is, no, bank has guidance, they weren't following it, they didn't implement all the security. Now granted, there's a lot of things in place that the bank did wrong, that Ocean Bank did go wrong, and they had some unusual payment sizes that were not normal. The level of security wasn't multi-factor at all. And it also the transactions came from a non-Patco IP address. So again, those are all things that if you implemented certain levels of transactional monitoring and session monitoring, the bank at the time would have been able to identify that. So that's something that was recently in the news. You're going to see more and more of this, especially when your commercial customers are hacked and lose a lot of money. They will sue you. They're going to bring you to court. So please implement their correct security and put it back on them for their security. And if they're really forcing you not to implement security, have them sign off that they turn down security on your end, so that they understand really what the risks are. And of course, the last layer is the operational layer. I say that's everything else. That's your back-end operations. That's your who has admin access, incident response, vendor management, your customer education and training. One of the things that I'm starting to see folks implement is risk assessments on their commercial customers as well. So that's something that you should probably strongly consider. I know that it's probably done at some level, but you want to really put together a complete program, including potentially site visits and some other additional due diligence activities. All right, moving through. Now we're on a new topic, mobile devices. I think it's very common to see more and more banks and credit unions implement bring your own device. So everyone's bringing in their iPhones, the Android devices, and the challenge is really having the organization control over that device. Would you allow your employees to bring their laptops into the bank or the credit union? Probably not, right? Same thing with your phones. Think about it. You want to make sure that you can control, at a minimum, any sensitive data on that phone, and then, of course, be able to monitor or detect it. If someone does, say, jailbreak that phone and can unlock certain things, you want to make sure your technology that you are using can identify that. You also want to consider implementing antivirus software. I think you're going to see a lot of issues, especially with the Android devices coming up. It's just Android is the Windows of the 1990s. You know, it's the most common OS in America. I think it holds 50% of it, with Apple coming in at 30% in the U.S. So it's something that you want to make sure that you protect. Password protect all the information, encrypt the device, have remote wipe features, also have an instant response plan for a lost device. How do you ensure that you are able to quickly remote wipe it? Train your users, you know, through educational awareness that, hey, when there is an event, you need to let me know as soon as possible. We're not going to be mad that you lost your phone, that kind of thing. You're not going to get in trouble. We're not going to charge you. But we need to remote wipe it as soon as possible, and then we'll get you a new phone. I've also found to see some financial institutions actually issue the phone, whether it's an iPhone or Android device, to the users that need it. So once they present a business requirement, they're now purchasing and issuing those phones, again, just so that they can have complete control over that phone. All right, the next item we're going through, I'm sorry, we're going through this very quickly. We've got a lot to cover, but next item we're going to cover is system security monitoring. One of the challenges I see out there is a lot of your, your firewalls and your IDS systems, and you're doing a good job monitoring that stuff. It's all the other systems. It's your operating systems. It's your applications. It's your databases. Whether it's system functionality issue or it's just an internal lack of knowledge, but you're not tracking or reviewing security logs generated or that could be generated by that system. And when discussing it with a lot of you, one of the reoccurring themes I see is that I think it's just not part of your due diligence process. It was chosen by the business unit. However, they're not the ones that think about security. They're thinking about all the flashy functionality that the salesperson presented. So making sure that you add that as part of your due diligence. Do you have the basics? Do you, for us to ensure that that data is being tracked and monitored, so that we know who's accessing it, when they're accessing it, and what they're doing to it, so that if you have to go back and look at something, you can do that forensic investigation. Again, this is something we see very common through a lot of the banking applications out there. Identify what I would say, if you want to start somewhere, start with the Glibber technologies. Again, Glibber technologies are also your technologies that prevent breaches to occur, but usually those are the ones that have monitoring in place already. It's all the storage ones that do a poor job. And then, of course, if your vendor does not have the system in place or does not have a monitoring system, work with them. Put that as, make sure when you go to the user groups, you put that on there as the top of the list, as we want to be able to, when we need to comply with Glibber, be able to see to track the events that are going on with that application, database, whatever it is, operating system that you want to track. Patch management, I know it's been a near and dear heart to a lot of us recently. Patch management is very hard, very difficult. We see that a lot of times it's constantly changing. You install a patch, it resets. You have to reinstall maybe Adobe somewhere that it shouldn't be installed. It's very difficult to comply with a lot of your own patch management policies. A lot of times we see that the reporting is weak, as also the patch management policy is weak. What you need to do is you need to implement a automated solution. There are solutions like Shavlik is one that we see very common out there. Lumention PatchLink is also another one that we see a lot of clients use as well. Vanguard, BigFix is the IBM product. They do a really good job of downloading and just deploying patches for you. And you want to be able to automate this, because if you don't automate this, there's no way you can track and have a really good handle of what you're trying to install. Right now the three most common vendors that are being attacked isn't Microsoft anymore. It's Adobe with their Reader product or any of the Flash products. It's Apple with their QuickTime solution. You've seen a lot of entrepreneurs come out with that. Oracle with their Java, as well as their database systems. So you're seeing a lot more of those type of patches that need to be installed that folks aren't just doing. Whether it's not included in your patch process or not, it just needs to get into that patch process. You want to develop a process to oversee that and measure it. A lot of folks don't do the measuring. You want to be able to measure it. Are you compliant with your policy? If your policy says you need to install patches, security patches within 15 or 30 days, how are you doing? You know, what's your measurement? How many times did you feel that policy? You know, I'm not saying that someone has to be fired because you missed a patch, but to understand the root cause of it and fix it, augment your process to make sure that it doesn't happen again. It's just, this is something that is really critical, and all it takes is that phishing email to come through, someone to click on something, and now the bank compromised. You know, and that's a really scary thing to see, and I hope that doesn't happen to anyone on the call today. And again, it's okay to communicate and report some of the exceptions to either your IT steering committee or your risk committee, saying this is what we're struggling with. You know, we patched this, but then this arises, and we missed this patch. It's okay to report it. It's okay to say this is what we missed. It's about continuous communication and conversations internally to make sure that you can eventually fix it and get it right. Third-party management, some of the issues have to do with just management just really signing off. I would say just not identifying the issues. You know, they're signing off on that they reviewed the SAS, the SAE-16, sorry, I almost said SAS-70. They signing off that they did this SAE-16. But, you know, when you asked about it, well, what'd you see? Like, well, you know, I reviewed it, it's fine. You know, yeah, we addressed all the user control considerations. But what about the issues that identified in the audit? Was the scope appropriate? Did it cover everything that is important to you? If it didn't, what was your follow-up? There's going to be, if you do it right, it actually creates a ton of work for you, unfortunately. But if you do it right, you're supposed to have those follow-up conversations. Document those conversations with your vendors. You know, if you find something that needs to be remediated, track it. And if they say, well, we just released the SAE-16, we'll get it in next year's, track it for a year. It's okay to have an open item for a year. Just say that, hey, this is something that we're working on towards with the vendor. They do this activity once a year. We're going to have to wait till the next year to see if that has been closed. You know, make sure you know. I know we talked about the global section of the reporting of requirements. Same thing here. When you're dealing with monitoring activities, conclude on the activity's effectiveness. Measure your contract compliance. You know, I'm not saying that if they fall short of your contract that you need to fire them or anything, but it's a good conversation to have, and maybe you could reduce the cost of that vendor going forward. If they did, you know, if they say 99.9% uptime and they were 99.8, maybe that's something that you can push back to them and say, well, listen, you know, you didn't deliver where you wanted, rather than saying, you know, failure to comply, we're not paying you at all, but maybe you can negotiate that on the next contract. And always request from your lead examiner the FFIEC report on that third party. You'd be surprised. They do a lot of them. For a lot of these, especially the big service providers, you'll be able to get your report on them for a lot of them, and it's something that you should look at. I know some of you probably have, I can't disclose who, I know everyone probably knows on the phone, but there's been some big issues with one of the service providers, and something that you know, from a bank's perspective, your job was to track and monitor the remediation efforts by that vendor, and also start to develop a game plan if you needed to leave that vendor to go somewhere else. I'm not saying you had to, but you needed to start those conversations. Some of a new item here has to do with cloud services in cloud computing. I don't see a lot of banks using it right now, but some of the major issues is, you know, data is commingled with other organizational data. You know, and that would be an example of a community cloud that's shared with several organizations, or a public cloud, which is available to any paying customer. If you have a private cloud, then your data is not commingled, or shouldn't be commingled with anyone else's data. There's obviously data confidentiality issues. You know, is the data being encrypted? How does the encryption work? How do you get access to decrypt it? That kind of thing. The integrity. If it's constantly being, you know, shared amongst their environment, where is your data? How do you know that it hasn't been changed or accessed by someone outside of your organization who has the authority to access it? And of course, the availability is always a big thing. Where is it? right? You need to suddenly access it and you're having issues. Where'd your data go? That type of thing. So you need to be able to identify those issues. Of course, there's also legal and regulatory concerns. So what do you need to do? I think you want to consider the sensitivity of the data and how are they going to protect it. Making sure that there is encryption. From a data segregation standpoint, understand how they ensure that your data has the necessary integrity requirements that you need. If it's not important data, like if you're using Salesforce.com, it's just really tracking sales. Maybe it's not as important as if your core provider information is out in the cloud. I don't see anyone doing that. I'm just saying this just for an example. Data recovery. What happens if your location goes down? We have a hurricane up here in the Northeast, the banks up in and around the Northeast. How do you get access to that data? What is your process there? Or whoever that cloud provider is, they have a earthquake. Maybe they're on the West Coast. They have an earthquake. How do you get access? What's their procedures for getting you up and running? Hopefully, it's something that you can quickly put a procedure on together, and you're up and running seamlessly. So understanding that business continuity and the security requirements around your data is very important. Regulatory compliance issues. There's a ton. Do they have other financial institutions that they do business with? Do they understand the regulatory landscape? How they ensure that they're, are they being looked at by the regulators? I'm sure places like Google and those places may have, the FDIC taking a visit to their operations as well for some of the banking customers. I don't know. I would not know that because I know a lot of banks haven't or credit unions haven't moved forward to cloud yet. But I know as you continue to expand your operations and look for more cost-effective ways, the cloud is something that is going to be in a lot of your organizations. And I think it will start on some of the non-sensitive data, but eventually we'll get to the sensitive data that you're managing. And basically, when you talk at cloud computing at its basic level, it's just another form of you just have to do vendor management. That's all it is. Understanding what the risks and threats to your organization, and then addressing them. One of the things that I see folks struggle with when it comes to vendor management is that when they do a risk assessment, they'll have high, moderate, and low risk vendors. And one of the things they'll say is, well, if it's moderate risk, I have to do all these things to this vendor, but a lot of them are NA, which is true. A lot of things that you do from a monitoring perspective is not applicable. But what you want to do is being able to say, well, this type of vendor, you need to do these minimal things. If you have attorneys, what are the basic stuff? And the example going back, it's confidentiality agreement, and it is looking at maybe like a security assessment, because they're not going to have a safe 16. Service providers, though, it's different. You're getting a safe 16 on them. You're doing some addition, maybe a site visit, some other things like that. So the type of third party or vendor also can play into what you need to do from a monitoring perspective. Don't just limit yourself or lump everything in to those high, moderate, and low categories. Think about the actual risks that are that service provider or vendor is providing you. All right, business continuity. Some of the issues, I think, functionally, most of you folks can respond pretty good. It's the documentation that you get beat up year after year after year by the examiners. The key to any really good, strong business continuity plan is really your business impact analysis. What you want to include in your business impact analysis is, an assessment or prioritization. A business impact analysis, let me say, is different than a risk assessment. A business impact analysis really just the prioritization of all your business functions and processes. Risk assessment is talking about, hurricanes and fires and floods and that type of stuff. But your BIA is just trying to get at what's the most important to my operation, and in what order do I bring things back up? What are the interdependencies? A lot of folks don't do a good job identifying the interdependencies, whether it's departmental interdependencies, or business function interdependencies. I'll try saying that really fast. maybe it's how many computers you need, or workspace requirements, those type of things. Identify that in your business impact analysis. Identify any kind of legal or regulatory requirements the institution or needs to restore to that business function. Estimate your maximum allowable downtime as well as acceptable level of losses. Sometimes that's harder to kind of identify, but even if you're just trying to put something simple together, just say, yeah, we'll have a loss here, we'll have a financial loss here if we don't get this product and service up and running, that type of thing. And try to estimate the loss. If we lose a service for a day, it's $10,000. If it's 2 days, it's $50,000. And that will help you justify bringing that business function up and running sooner rather than later. Other thing you want to do is recovery time objectives and also your recovery point objectives. And that will help you identify your critical, all that stuff should help you identify your critical path. You want to make sure that your testing is based on your business impact analysis. If you identify something that's really critical, you need to test it more often than not. And testing should be more than just a walkthrough. Unless it's pandemic, you can get away with doing pandemic walkthroughs. When you're thinking about pandemic, again, just look at I shouldn't say again, you should focus on your business functions that cannot be performed, cannot be performed remotely. Because the ones that can be performed remotely, now it's as simple as giving someone VPN access. The ones that cannot, well, you're going to have a plan to get the people physical access to the branches or whatever buildings they need physical access to perform those functions, and that could be an issue. Board reporting, again, communicate to the board your test results annually on an ongoing basis. If you fail a test, if it's a simple correction, you probably don't need to retest. But again, that's the judgment management needs to make and discuss why you don't need to retest. If it's something that was critical, then you may want to retest in that same year. And make sure you have current up-to-date multi-year test plans. So discussing all the technologies, business functions that you plan to test and recover over the next 3 years. 3 years is usually something acceptable that we're seeing so far anyways. If that changes, I'll let you know next year. Resources used for this presentation here. There's some links. And does anyone have any questions? I know I covered that pretty quickly. There's probably a lot of questions for you that you folks may have.
And we do just have a few more minutes for questions, so if anyone does have a question and hasn't sent them in yet, please do so now, and we'll get to them in just a moment. All right, our first question for Will. Do you see more financial institutions issuing bank-owned phones or moving to bring your own device?
That's a very good question. Right now we see a mix. It depends really. It's coming down to a resource issue. I think some of the banks say that they just want complete control over that device and willing to spend the extra money. Others are looking at it as an opportunity to say, you know what, we're not going to spend the extra money. We're just going to have them understand that we're installing software that allows us to remote wipe your phone, or in some cases, like I know it's the case at Wolf, if they remote wipe my Wolf email, it's only affecting, it doesn't affect my full device, it only affects where my confidential information is being stored, which is basically email and any of my temps on my docs. If I open up a doc, that's it. That's the only thing being wiped. As long as you have control over that phone, that's the key. That's the key, and just understand that these risks and threats are going to continuously change, and just have an understanding. You know, when you see something that happens in the newspaper, try to treat it like, could this happen to me? And what would I do? And what do I have differently installed that would prevent that kind of breach? You're just hoping that you're not the first one. There's always someone first, and we just hope that it's none of us.
Great. Can you please tell us again the names of the client hardware secure browsers?
Yeah, so the biggest one out there, Trusteer, I would say IronKey is number 2 on the list. And then I haven't seen this at all, but I've heard Previx is another one that we've seen out there, or I should say haven't seen. I've heard of it. I haven't seen it in action. Trusteer and IronKey are the ones that I've seen some of my clients have at their organization. And from what I've heard, it's cost effective for the ones that are using it. The biggest challenge they have is getting their commercial customers or their retail customers to actually use it, because it is an additional layer of security that some folks may look at as an unnecessary burden to them when they're accessing their internet banking technologies. But I think it's worth it. I'm actually thinking about purchasing it for myself, just to use, because you can buy a personal license just to use, like when I'm doing my not so much online banking activity, but just trading stocks or accessing any kind of confidential information.
Great. Well, we're actually out of time, so if you did send in a question and Will wasn't able to answer it, he will get back to you via email. And please feel free to just jot down his contact information. It's up on the screen right now, and he'll be happy to answer any follow-up questions that our audience might have. And I want to remind everyone that the slides are posted at www.wolfandco.com/webinars/2012. And I'll also be posting a recording of this presentation to the same web address later on this afternoon. So please feel free to listen in again if you missed anything. Want to just let everyone know a few save the dates that we have coming up. So if you just take a look at the screen right now, and our next webinar will be held on Tuesday, September 11th on Goodbye RFP, Hello Smart Vendor Selection. And I've posted a few other upcoming webinars and events you all might be interested in attending. So please visit the Wolf and Wolfpack websites for more information and registration details. And immediately following the conclusion of this webinar, you'll have the opportunity to complete a survey. As always, we appreciate your feedback so we can continue to improve our webinar program. Thanks so much for attending today. Will, thanks so much for presenting today. We look forward to your participation in future webinars. Have a great afternoon, everyone.